But yeah, so Dave, with that, man, I'm gonna take a little breaky break, man. You do your thing, and I will be back in it, like I said, maybe 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay,
All
awesome.
right. All
So just so everyone knows, I'm not able to see the chat right now, so just gonna have to kind of bear with me on that. But happy to go into some things. So this is One West Hebrew Israelites' favorite Bible dictionary. In fact, Jim mentioned it earlier. It's the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary because they think a couple of references are particularly useful to them. But in fact, what we find as we dig into this work, it's really very damaging to them and they don't realize it. And we're going to look at a few examples. But one of the first things I want to do, and I've talked about this before, but if you've never seen my stuff before, you may not realize this. I want to talk about the definition of Gentiles in this dictionary because they love to go to it. And so let me just give me a second to flip to it. And almost there. Oh, right there. Okay. So on 195, it says Gentiles, and then they'll jump straight to the definition. And it says usually it means a non-Israelite people. And so the argument thus follows, well, sometimes then Gentiles can mean Israelites. And if you go into any other Bible dictionary, including other Zondervan Bible dictionaries, which I have on my shelf, it just says things like a non-Jew. What's happening though here, and they don't notice this, is there's actually three different words being defined here. So it says Gentiles, I don't know if you guys can see this, nation, people. And it is all three of those that are being given a definition. So then it goes on to say, usually it means a non Israelite people. So ultimately, what it's doing is it's going to the underlying terms, which would be ethnos in Greek, goy in Hebrew, specifically dealing with the plurals. So Gentiles would be ha goyim or ta ethne. And what that's saying is that Greek and Hebrew usually does mean a non-Israelite people. The translation Gentiles specifically, in fact, would always mean a non-Israelite person in that translation. But Gentiles is just one of the meanings for goyim and ethne. And so there are two other meanings that are given nation people. And just to illustrate what I'm talking about this, in the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary, if we go flip over and we're going to look at the word Mizpah, because it treats Mizpah in the same way it treats Gentiles, which in that one entry, we're getting multiple definitions. So I'm just going to flip over there. And this is on page 370. And it says, notice this, if you guys can see it again. It says Mizpah, watchtower, and then what's that word? What is that? Lookout post. Sorry. Apparently, I need some reading glasses. And then it goes on to say, found in Second Chronicles 20:24 and Isaiah 21:8 as a common noun. As a proper noun, it is used of, and then it goes on to define it. And so, again, different translations from an underlying Hebrew word, and within this one entry, we're getting the definitions that encompass all of them. So just the same way with Gentiles, with nation and people, all three words, it usually means a non-Israelite people. But when it comes to the translation Gentiles itself, again, because there's uncertainty for them, let's go to other Bible dictionaries. When we go to other Bible dictionaries, what do we find? We find that Gentiles specifically means a non-Israelite people. Now, when we look also then, I want to look now at the word Greek, because that's another word that comes up big with Hebrew Israelites in the New Testament. And we don't find a definition for Greek by itself in the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary, but on page 207, it says Greece. And so that's what we're defining here. And it says Grecia is Greece, the home of the Hellenists. Greeks and Grecians, however, are to be distinguished. Now, why is this the case? Because in the New Testament, Hellene is the word that the King James Version translates as Greek. Hellenistes is the word in the New Testament, like in Acts 6:1, where it translates it as Grecian. So it says Greeks, Hellene, and Hellenistes, Grecians, however, are to be distinguished. Greeks are generally those of the Hellenic race, and it gives a couple of citations: Acts 16:1, 18:4, and probably it says John 12:20. But the word may be used to indicate non-Jews, foreigners, and aliens. So notice that the word may be used to indicate non-Jews, foreigners, and aliens. In other words, non-Israelites. And it gives a specific citation for this, and that is Romans 1:16. Let's read that. And because it leads and really gives us insight into what it means throughout the rest of the book of Romans. It says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek." Now I'm reading the New American Standard Bible 2020 edition. The King James, I believe, renders this as Gentile, which would be the sense. Greek is being used broadly for non-Jews, foreigners, aliens, as it says in the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary. This is confirmed even more, if there's any doubt as to the meaning, when we go into Romans chapter 2. In verse 9, it says, "There will be tribulation and distress for every soul of mankind who does evil." Every soul of mankind. Let's think about that. That is all encompassing. That is all humans. There's going to be tribulation and distress for all humans who do evil. For the Jew first, and also for the Greek. So here again, the Jew and the Greek. Greek being used in that broader sense, not the Hellenists, the Hellenic race, but those who are non-Israelites. And then it continues in the next verse. "But glory, honor, and peace to everyone who does what is good, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For there is no partiality with God." So notice that too. That even shows there that it is all encompassing. Because if this is only about Israelites, then Paul can't possibly say there is no partiality with God, because God's partial. God shows partiality in everything he does for all eternity, because he has chosen one people and he deals with them exclusively. Now they'll say, well, what about all these verses in the Old Testament? God only had a covenant with Israel. God gave his word to Jacob, Psalm 119. All these verses they go to. Yes, but it wasn't for them only. He gave his word to them, not to keep to themselves, where foreigners would come and dwell in the land and they would turn them away. No, they were to welcome the foreigner. Isaiah 49:6, they were to be a light to the Gentiles, so that my salvation may reach the ends of the earth, it says. Paul applies this to his ministry in Acts 13. So it was not just for them. He dealt with Israel to then use Israel to deliver the Messiah, to provide the Messiah, and then to reach all of mankind through the ministry work that would follow. And of course, again, going into Old Testament times, foreigners were always welcome to join. We see this in Isaiah 56:3 and 6, where God speaks of the foreigners who join themselves to the Lord and they keep his covenant. And it even says, "Let not the foreigner who has joined himself to the Lord say that the Lord will surely separate me from his people." If they're going to be separated from his people, in this case they're not, but if they're concerned about it, then they must at that point be a part of his people. They have joined his people. And if you use the Apocrypha, which the Hebrew Israelites do, if you look in Judith chapter 14, verse 10, you have a guy who's an Ammonite. His name's Achior. You can see in verse 5, he's an Ammonite. And it says, he believed in God greatly and circumcised the foreskin of his flesh and was joined to the house of Israel to this day. So notice that he was joined to the house of Israel. He wasn't natively part of the house of Israel by birth, but he joined it by joining the people, joining in the covenant, joining in service to God. And so then, and continuing into Romans, into chapter 10, we get to verse 11. For the scripture says, whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. For the same Lord is Lord of all, abounding in riches for all who call on him. So notice that here. No distinction between Jew and Greek, using Greek in that same broad, general sense of non Jews, foreigners, and aliens. Now, I was saving this to this point, which is what about Jews? Because they're going to say that's just the southern kingdom. And at a time, they were right. But just like Jew would have originally been for Judah, and then Benjamin also came to be called Jews because Paul was of the tribe of Benjamin, but called a Jew, the term continued to evolve in its usage. The example that I like to use, it's a prominent example, and how words change over time, is if we go to the English word nice. The English word nice comes from the Latin nicius. That means ignorant. When we call a person nice today, clearly we're not calling them ignorant. That's not the connotation. The meaning and use of the term changed over time. Well, it's the same with Jew. So we go back to the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary, and on page 283, we get the definition of Jew. And it says originally it denoted one belonging to the tribe of Judah or to the two tribes of the southern kingdom. So this would be what they're saying. But later, its meaning was extended and it applied to anyone of the Hebrew race who returned from the captivity. As most of the exiles came from Judah, and as they were the main historical representatives of ancient Israel, the term Jew came finally to comprehend all of the Hebrew race throughout the world. And it gives examples in Esther chapter 2, verse 5, and Matthew 2, 2, where Jesus is called King of the Jews. He wasn't king just of the southern kingdom, he was king of the whole nation. And this is even reflected him being king of all of them in his ministry. We think about Jesus, he's talking to Jews, even in Acts chapter 2, the apostles, when their ministry begins after Jesus goes back to heaven, he is, they're all preaching to those who are called Jews. But what does Jesus say when he sends his disciples out to ministry in Matthew chapter 10, verses 5 and 6? He says, go not the way of the Gentiles or to the cities of Samaria, but go to only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Well, the house of Israel had one of two meanings. It was either the northern kingdom, and so Jesus could be then be saying, go only to the northern kingdom, or it refers to the united kingdom, all 12 tribes. Clearly, that's the scope of the ministry Jesus has. That's why when we go back into Luke chapter 2, we see Anna of the tribe of Asher as somebody who was in the temple every day, was a prophetess, was out there doing ministry of her own. And going back even further to the time of Hezekiah in 2 Chronicles chapter 30, Hezekiah sends couriers out throughout the land, even into the northern kingdom, and invites the remnant who was not exiled into Assyria to return to God. He calls them sons of Israel, and he says, return to God. So these are people who were separated from God. They were divorced from God, and God had said he would do, for example, in Hosea. And yet, Hezekiah calls them to return to God. And so many of them do. Now, does God approve of this? We know he does, because they were ritually unclean, impure. Hezekiah prays on their behalf because they came with a right heart, and the text says God healed them. So even at this point in Jesus' ministry, the northern kingdom was in scope. They weren't rejected from his ministry, from his call to repentance. He was inviting them all to come back. And so then when we go to the Gentiles, we know Cornelius isn't a Gentile because Peter didn't need a revelation, a vision to know to go to Cornelius if he's a northern kingdom Israelite, because They've been going to Northern Kingdom Israelites all along. So we know again from this Gentile, which Cornelius is called, we see that in Acts 15 explicitly. Gentiles are not Israelites being called back that were part of the northern kingdom. They're non Israelites because it was new that non Israelites were being called. It was not new that northern kingdom people were being called.